In this video, we're going to go ahead and talk about layers in 3ds Max. Now, what are layers and what are they useful for? Well, layers kind of work like selection sets, but they're a little bit more in-depth and they give you a lot more options and flexibility than selection sets. So layers are extremely important. They're extremely important for organizing your scene, especially when you have a complex scene with a lot of assets and a lot of stuff all over the place. Basically, not working with layers is going to hurt you in the end, slow you down, and it's just going to make your project a very painful process. So it's extremely important to use layers and take advantage of them. Okay, so let's look at layers. To open up your layers, just go up here to the main toolbar and you see this icon looks like 3 sheets of paper stacked on top of each other. And if you click on that, you'll open up the layers window. Now from here you can create layers, you can manage your layers, you can do whatever you need to your layers. Now by default, there is a default layer created in 3ds Max every time you create a new scene. And of course it's going to be called default or 0. Okay? If we click on the plus icon, you can expand it and see all the contents of that layer. Everything that I've created so far in 3ds Max has been automatically placed inside that layer because that's the default layer. So there's only one default layer. And every object in my scene belongs to that layer right now. From this window, I can change all kinds of different things. Here's the sphere, for example. I can choose to hide the sphere simply by clicking right here under the hide column. If I click on this dash mark, you'll see this little icon that looks kind of like a person wearing a mask pops up, and that makes the sphere hide. And you'll notice it did become hidden inside my viewport. So I can quickly hide and unhide that object using that little hide tool. Okay? We also have a freeze column over here. I can freeze the sphere and you can see it turned gray and it has a little icon of very original snowflake there. And we can go ahead and freeze the sphere. So if I try to select the sphere, I can't. So let's unfreeze it. We also have controls for rendering. So if we want this to render or not, we can turn off its rendering capability. And we'll talk about rendering more in a video that's coming up real soon. We can also change the color of this object. So if we don't like the purple, maybe we want the sphere to be a sort of light blue. So there it goes. Now it's a light blue. Okay. So we have a lot of access to a lot of different things here. Let's create a brand new layer. So let's click this icon up here, which creates a new layer. And another thing to take note, when you create a new layer using this button, what's going to happen is if you have any object selected, that object will be placed into that layer automatically. Right now I don't have anything selected, so when I create this layer, it's completely empty. By default, it'll be called layer 1. So let me rename the layer. I'm going to call it stuff. Okay? Now right now, stuff is the current layer. How do I know that? Well, if you go to this column that's right here, you'll notice that there's a check mark, a black check mark. Now only one layer can be the active layer at a time. So what's the active layer? The active layer is the layer that currently 3ds Max is using as the layer where everything's going to go into. So from now on, because the stuff layer is active, that's why it has this check mark. If I create any new objects, any new spheres, any new boxes, any new doors or windows or characters or anything, those objects are going to be placed inside the stuff layer automatically because the stuff layer is currently the active layer. Okay? Now if I want the default layer to be the active layer again, I have to go ahead and click on this empty box that you see up here. So just click on that and it turns into a check mark. Now the default layer is the active layer. Any new objects that are created from here on out will be dropped into this default layer by default. So if I want stuff to go into the stuff layer, I have to turn it into the active layer, which is as easy as clicking this little mark here and putting this check mark. Okay? Now if I want to put stuff in the stuff layer, how do I do that? Well, I can select the sphere, for example, and maybe hold down Control and select these two lights. I can right click on the stuff layer and I can go ahead and click on Add Selected Objects. Very similar to when we were working with selection sets. Now if I expand that, I can see that I have both the Omni lights and the sphere inside of this layer. So we have two layers now, and one of them contains half the objects in the scene and the other one contains the other half. Okay. Now another thing to make note of is that the layer itself has properties to hide and freeze. The individual objects can be hidden and frozen or set to be renderable or not renderable. but the layer itself can be overridden. So for example, if I want to hide everything in the stuff layer, instead of going one by one and clicking hide, 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 what I can do instead is just click one time on the hide icon for the stuff layer. And you notice that all the lights and the sphere were hidden. I can also do the same thing for freeze. So if I click on freeze, the lights and the sphere are now frozen. The lights are barely visible because they have a gray wireframe against a gray background, so they camouflage very well. But the sphere, you can see right here, it turned gray, and I can't select that it's frozen. So I can unfreeze that, the entire layer, and now the whole layer is unfrozen. So I can hide or unhide the whole layer, or freeze and unfreeze the entire layer. So you have a lot of control with these layers. Okay, so that pretty much does it for layers. If you want to get rid of a layer, it's pretty simple. Just right click on top of the layer and that's strange. Okay. Edit that out of the video. I made a mistake. Edit that out of the video. Okay. Okay. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. If you want to get rid of this layer, we're going to have to first remove the objects from the layer. So to do that, it's pretty simple. Right click on the stuff layer and then go to select. And that's going to select all the objects that are in that layer. With all the objects selected, right click on the default layer and click on add selected objects. Once you do that, all the objects now belong to the default layer, and the stuff layer is, well, it's empty. So what I can do at this moment is right click on the stuff layer and then click on delete, and that'll get rid of the layer. Now the layer's gone. My objects are still here because I removed them from the layer, so the layer was basically like an empty box that I just threw away. So now that layer's gone, and we're just working with the default layer. Okay, so that's how managing layers works in 3ds Max. They're extremely useful for organizing things in your scene, and in the long run, they do end up saving you a lot of time, work, energy, and, well, most importantly, they make you more efficient at completing your projects. So that does it for the layers.